Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to this special edition of Perspective. I'm Tina Jha. A day ahead of presenting the Union Budget 2024-25, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman tabled the Economic Survey 2023-24 in Parliament on Monday. Spread over 522 pages and divided into 13 chapters, the survey gives an overview of the state of the Indian economy, its strengths and the challenges that lie ahead. In the survey, the Chief Economic Advisor says the Indian economy is on a strong wicket and stable footing, demonstrating resilience in the face of geopolitical challenges. The Indian economy has consolidated its post-COVID recovery with policymakers, fiscal and monetary, ensuring economic and financial stability. Nonetheless, change is the only constant for a country with high growth aspirations, and for the recovery to be sustained, there has to be heavy lifting on the domestic front because the environment has become extraordinarily difficult to reach agreements on key global issues like trade, investment and climate. In its several chapters, the Economic Survey has highlighted the government policies and their performance, their impacts, innovations, developments and success stories worth emulating. Giving an assessment of the crucial sectors such as agriculture, industry, infrastructure and services, the Economic Survey has contemplated challenges as well that lie ahead and provided possible solutions to steer through these challenges. We'll bring before you the key highlights and also analyze the biggest takeaways from the Economic Survey 2023-24 with a distinguished panel of experts. So let me begin the program by introducing them to you. I'm delighted to welcome in the studio Professor Charan Singh, CEO, eGrowth Foundation. Next to him is Dr. S.P. Sharma, Chief Economist and Director of Research, PhD, Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And joining us virtually is Professor Arvind Mohan, Department of Economics, University of Lucknow. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this special broadcast on Sunset TV. But before we get in your views on the Economic Survey, a quick soundbite of the Chief Economic Advisor. Let's listen in to what he said after preparing this survey. So he addressed a press conference. Let's listen into this quick soundbite.
Security dominates efficiency. Supply security dominates supply efficiencies. And you can see that in the last 3-4 years, protective actions have actually moved up very, very sharply. There is momentum in the economy. In fact, we are now 1 quarter in the new financial year, and even high-frequency indicators are telling us that the economy is carrying on the momentum that we have seen until the end of March 2024, when we grew at 8.2%. Private capex has been growing. Private capex has recovered. After the stagnation or decline we saw in 1920 and 2021, they did pick up in 21-22 and 22-23. Industrial production, you can see a broad-based acceleration in all possible areas for the FY24, 9.5%, recovering very smartly from the overall growth of 2.1 in FY23.
Professor Singh, so let me begin by asking you first, and this is what the Chief Economic Advisor had to say after the tabling of the report. In the report, in the preface, in fact, titled Steering the Country Through Compacts and Consensus, the CEA says the Indian economy is on a strong wicket and stable footing, demonstrating resilience in the face of geopolitical challenges. And in fact, the numbers say 3 years of 7+ growth rate, headline inflation largely under control, trade deficit is lower in FY24 than in 23, and the current account deficit for the year also stands around 0.7% of the GDP. Looking at all of this and the powerful statement from the CEA, how encouraging are these statements reflecting the state of the Indian economy today?
Throughout the year, I have been saying, and many economists have really noted the data, that the Indian economy was really performing exceedingly well. The 8.2% growth that was recorded was very impressive and really surprised many economists who thought we'll generally be in the range of 7 to 8%. As the CA just mentioned, the first quarter of the current year, going with the high frequency indicators, again, I think we'll be growing at a very high rate. Not only we in our own country have felt that the Indian economy is moving in a different orbit now, a bigger, higher orbit, but if you look at the latest data released by the IMF, they have also updated their growth by 0.2% to 7%, just been released. So given all the indicators that the Indian economy has been putting up, That is why all of them have been very good, and that is why one of the arguments that has been given is that it's time for the rating agencies to upgrade our rating, because at this point of time we are not only the fastest growing economy, not only that we have recorded it in the last 1 year. If you look at the projections being made by the international institutions, we are the fastest growing economy for next 5 years. And given this promising growth, not only in terms of GDP figures, in terms of taming inflation, if you look at the inflation figures, our inflation is reasonably under control when you compare it with the rest of the world. The current account deficit, of course, is another indicator against such stiff global competition. If you are able to maintain, of course, goods have suffered a little bit, but services have done exceedingly well. So against such a stiff global competition, if you are able to maintain such a growth momentum in terms of exports and external sector, it simply speaks about the strength of the economy.
Dr. Sharma, when the Indian economy is on such a strong footing, why has the CEA been so conservative with the numbers? The growth forecast, if you look at the numbers, stands somewhere close to 6.5 to 7, and it's lower. It's lower than what the RBI has projected, what the other forecasters have also projected.
They were conservative for the last year also. They were not projecting the growth that much high, more than 8%, and growth surprised everyone in the country and abroad. So strong wicket and balanced footing is the actually central point of this economic survey, and going forward we are marching towards the Viksit Bharat by 2047. As mentioned by Professor Charan Singh ji, that all the fundamentals like the inflation trajectory, the manufacturing growth, which was at around 10% during the last year, 23-24, and the other parameters like the exports are in the high trajectory, and we are posting the new highs in the export of manufacturing or exports of services. So overall the momentum of the economy is very good to move forward, supported by various reforms during the last 7-8 years, starting from the Make in India, then Atmanirbhar Bharat, PLI scheme, and the Startup India. All these reforms are now becoming visible and providing the great numbers to the Indian economy. And I believe 8% is now becoming the new normal, though they are conservative, but still we are believing that we will grow more than 8% in the current year also, supported by many reforms, and particularly the momentum in the manufacturing sector, because the agriculture sector is now supporting the demand trajectory in the rural segments. The agriculture sector grew more than 3% for many years. And for the current year also, there are expectations that agriculture will grow more than 5% or somewhere between 5 to 6%. So that will support the manufacturing trajectory with the demand. Aggregate demand will happen and will remain intact in the coming times also. And one more thing, that exports, though we were very slow in the export trajectory in the 2013, 14, 15, 16, but now after the coronavirus, now we are becoming more and more robust and connecting with the global supply chains. Our services exports are really wonderful and posting the great numbers and supporting the overall trade deficit and the current account balance. So in the export segment, despite troubles in sea, despite headwinds, high inflation, high interest rates, we were able to grow fast in the export trajectory, and we were the fastest moving exporter also in 22-23 as compared with the larger exporters in the world. So going forward, we have great numbers to support and great reforms to support, but we have to focus more on the MSMEs. Right. That will become the great engine of economic growth in the coming times, because they will create the employment opportunities for the growing young population.
That's something that the CA has spoken about when he documents the 6 critical areas towards a Viksit Bharat. So in more ways than one, the survey is also futuristic, so talking about the roadmap towards a Viksit Bharat by 2047. We'll come back to all of those 6 areas and discuss one by one. But let me also bring in Professor Mohan into the conversation. Professor, glad to have you with us on this special edition of Perspective. Before we move ahead and understand, get in your views on the economic survey, let me, for the benefit of our viewers, take this question. Why is the economic survey so significant? If you could help us understand that, and then we could come to the second part of the question on what are some of the significant takeaways for you from this particular economic survey that has been authored by the Chief Economic Advisor.
Thanks for having me on the show. See, economic survey probably is the most important document which tells us that where does the economy stand, how the economy is performing, or how it has performed, say, in last 1 year or so. And that gives lots of pointers that what the budget should actually attempt to do. This also provides a platform to make an assessment that tomorrow, for example, the budget will be there. We can understand that what should be the probable direction and make an assessment of the budget also, whether it is touching those critical things which are coming from the economic survey. Now, having said that, I find this economic survey to be very interesting. As has been mentioned by the other panelists, it certainly indicates that the economy is doing very well. Indicators are extremely robust. A growth rate of 8.2% is truly flattening in current circumstances. And as has been reported in the economic survey, international environment continues to be challenging. And that also requires increased domestic effort, as the economic survey is suggesting. More domestic effort will be needed to continue the trajectory on which we are moving. And here, economic survey comes out with few very interesting areas for possible interventions. One of them relates to employment. Employment generation or unemployment has continued to remain a huge problem. And this economic survey very clearly indicates that where the problem is. Particularly clearly mentions that the employability, if you're looking at our youth, only around 50% of them are employable in true sense. In other words, other 50 require critical support. Maybe we can talk about this later. Another important thing it is indicating is about agriculture. See, 1991, we started first generation reform, and the two major planks of that great reform were industry-centric and service sector-centric, all of them primarily urban in nature. And we have always been talking about possible second generation reform, which in my understanding will have two major planks. One of them has to be rural development, including agriculture, allied activities, and maybe cottage industries. And the second plank obviously has to be human development, primarily health and education. When we are looking at possible rural development, this economic survey is clearly indicating, is talking about a number of things like ENAM, where we are talking about a national agricultural market. It is also talking about possible incentives to the state. And I think this is very important because second generation reform, which particularly involves rural development, agricultural development, can not be led alone by the union government. The federal structure, particularly the role of the states, is very important. I think this economic survey is clearly providing pointers or points to ponder that how we can take it forward. It will be very interesting to look at that how budget responds to these indicators.
Sure. Professor, I'll come to this, and because it's important, there is a statement that the CA also mentions that in the medium term, we can sustain on a 7% growth only if we are able to build up on the structural reforms of the past decades. Now, what is going to be the future course of actions towards realizing that? What are going to be the key focus areas, employment being one of them?
See, my own view is that, of course, 7% is not the best that we can grow. As you were asking that question, why did he pitch us between 6.5 and 7%? That probably is in addition to what has been mentioned by Dr. Sharma. This is also our past if you look at the average growth rate that we have had. In view of the global uncertainties also that are unfolding in front of us. The geopolitics is changing, the power dynamics is changing. There's so much of growth that's happening within country, but so much of growth is not happening in rest of the world. That means our export sector is certainly going to take a hit. So I think it's very prudent that he has pegged it at a conservative level. But then the point that I'm trying to make is 7% is not something which we need to be satisfied with. The country has a potential to grow 8% and above. And whenever we get a chance to grow 8% as we did it last time, and out of the 3 quarters we recorded more than 8%. So obviously our potential is much more. So our output gap is expected to be much higher. Now therefore, Short term, yes, 6.57, fine. But in the medium term, then he has identified various areas in which we could really be doing lots of work. In his presentation that he articulated it so well, he spoke about, of course, MSMEs that needs to be strengthened. He also spoke about our climate, where we need to do a lot. Still, we need to do a lot. On agriculture, a lot needs to be done. Labor reforms also, a lot needs to be done. And some of these issues he has flagged, where he has spoken about the 6 key areas that you were also mentioning. In those 6 key areas, he speaks about the private investment, and I think he's right. The employment generation generally comes from the private investment. Crowding in has taken place since the capital expenditure of the government has been rising in the last few years. That has also, and he mentioned it in his presentation also, that has led to increased private investment. So I think that is one area which we need to grow very, very strongly. And then he has also mentioned about, in addition to MSMEs, he speaks about agriculture. He also speaks about green transition. I think that's very important, spends lots of time on the green transition, where he is explaining food that is required and how much of land that is required, and food for human consumption and food for the non-vegetarian. He has spoken about all that. And the important point which I think Professor Mohan was making, and I would also like to stress, is the gap between educated and employment. That is where lots of effort needs to be put in. And finally, he speaks about the state capacity. So given these 6 strategies that he has, and I think each one of them is very important, and on each one there can be a thesis written, I think that is what will take us into a much higher orbit, medium to long term, the vision that we have.
One of the key statements pertaining to the private sector, and the CA says the action lies in the private sector. When it comes to job creation, we've seen a lot of activity going on, especially since the Prime Minister said, let India, and which has the highest population of the youngsters, that is a demographic advantage that India has. When he says, let's not be job seekers and let's be job creators, how can we expect? It's a tripartite arrangement that we expect between the center, the states and the private sector. How does the private sector need to come in big? They have to realize the aspirations of a younger India by 2047.
Yes, very true, because now the private sector should come forward to provide the adequate employment opportunities for the growing young population. But one thing should be noted, that private sector expands when the consumption trajectory expands in India. So firstly, we have to support the consumption trajectory with the support of rise in incomes. Like the middle class, they are facing heat from the high taxation. We are imposing the peak tax rate on the middle incomes at 15 lakh. We are imposing 30%. So that has to be relaxed. And there must be a great rationalization in the direct taxes, so that the disposable income becomes robust in the hands of the consumers, and they are able to spend more in the goods and services, and the manufacturing sector is able to expand more and to deploy more and more workforce in their respective premises. So I think the drivers of growth are from the consumption segment, as we are driven by the consumption trajectory. We are not supported by the external sector, because though we are robust in the export segment, but our major growth driver is our domestic consumption. So firstly, we have to support our consumption to create employment. Though consumption is driving the growth, but the consumption will also become a major growth driver to create the employment opportunities in the country. Because with the growth of consumption, the factories will be able to expand more. And the second thing is the ease of doing business. Though we are robust in the ease of doing business, we have improved a lot from 142 to 63 by the World Bank. But after that, there is no rating of the ease of doing business, but still we have to percolate this ease of doing business at the factory level. The compliances should be removed, though the government is doing a lot to remove the compliances. They have removed more than 40,000 compliances during the last 3-4 years, but more needs to be done in the coming times to make it more robust, and that should happen in the factory premises. That ease of doing business is enjoyed by the small businesses and the MSMEs, because MSMEs are the major growth driver, the futuristic growth driver of the Indian economy. They will be able to create more and more employment opportunities. There are more than 6 crore MSMEs in India, and if they are facilitated and provided with a great hand holding, they will be able to create I think more than crores of jobs, more than 6 crore jobs in the next 6-7 years. That is the estimate of industry body PSD CCI. The critical factors are, firstly, we have to support the demand trajectory with the expansion in the disposable income in the middle income levels, and second, the rural consumption with the support of rural enterprises, providing the adequate opportunities to the rural entrepreneurs in the food processing, in the agriculture segments, the promotion of exports, like the export trajectory of the agriculture sector. We expanded from $30 billion in 2021 to $40 billion in 21-22 and $50 billion in 22-23. So the exports are increasing significantly in the agriculture segment. There is a lot of scope to expand this growth to the level of $100 billion by
sure. We'll come back and discuss discuss and the other areas that find place in the 6 predicated areas for Amrit Kal. But since we're talking about employment, very interestingly, Professor Mohan, what the economic survey says, and it says employment in our country should not just be seen as an income. It's something that's about dignity, about self-worth, self-esteem, self-respect, and standing in the family and community, not just about the income it brings. And that's why it is in the enlightened self-interest of the Indian corporate sector, swimming in excess profits, to take its responsibility to create jobs seriously. The fact is, when we say, and why should we just put the onus on the private sector? The fact is, it's a tripartite compact. The survey does acknowledge it, but at the same time, it says that there is a need to unshackle the corporate sector and also the field of academics. What are the kind of steps going forth you would expect, and would you expect the finance minister to announce something in this regard in the budget tomorrow, to expect some kind of forward-looking trajectory towards creating jobs, towards creating employment in the country?
See, what I read from the economic survey are 2 things. One is that the economic survey suggests that we should continue the trajectory which we have been following for a long time now. It also suggests some kind of a paradigm shift. When you are talking about restructuring or maybe kind of support to the private sector, increased investment that the private sector can generate, I think the suggestion comes from the first plank, where we are talking about some kind of continuity. But I think the most important aspect of this economic survey is, which I think you will find some reflections in tomorrow's budget also, is the apparent paradigm shift. See, the first generation reforms that we initiated in the 90s and have continued till date, all that was required was to provide a blueprint, and the major stakeholders, the industry, etc., the exporters, etc., they all joined hands and they catapulted the Indian economy from a crisis-ridden economy into the big league. Second generation reform is completely different. It requires institutional interventions, it requires hand-holding, and I think that is where this budget is hinting towards. Now, for example, on the agricultural front, it clearly is indicating, remember, I think one of panelist friend was mentioning the demand trajectory. Now, let's try to understand the importance of this demand. I'll recall that sometime around 2010, 2011, when President Obama was visiting India, American economy was in deep crisis. Their fiscal sector, because of $2 trillion package which was given to the industry, was compromised. Private sector was in deep trouble after the great meltdown. When the media asked him why you are going to India, he says that I'm going to seek market access. Now, what market he's talking about? He's talking about this rural economy. And this economic survey is clearly indicating towards that rural economy to open that up. And to open it up, it is talking about taking the reforms forward. Very clearly, in similar words, it is mentioning, we want to take this reform process forward. And for that, incentives to be given to the state. The detailing is a separate thing, but this is the primary idea. Second thing that they're talking about, which is very important from a structural perspective, is it is very clearly suggesting that when we are looking at the skill levels of people who are getting employed, only 2% of them have formal training. another around 8% of them will have some kind of informal training. All told, 10 to 12% are trained in one way or the other. Others have no training at all. And this is a huge pointer towards skill development. I think the way we have carried forward the skill development, huge structural changes are needed there. And this economic survey is clearly indicating that we have certainly moved forward. We are one of the strongest economy in the world, but there are critical domestic challenges which need to be addressed. And the skill set is one critical area which certainly needs to be addressed. So equally importantly, the budget, this economic survey is also emphasizing on the employability of women and their rising. We have seen that in last few years, the workforce participation rate for female workers has risen. But even when it has risen, it has remained around 16 or 17%, which means close to around 84%, 83% of women in the age group of 15 to 60 are still not part of the workforce. And this is where it has to rise. Even if we have to sustain the levels of investment, whether it is private sector investment or the public sector investment, where from this investment will come? We have seen that almost 90 to 95% of India's investment has been financed by domestic saving. And where it is coming from? It is coming from India's demographic dividend. And that demographic dividend is critically dependent on increased workforce participation. Our challenge in last, say, 10 odd years has been that gradually India's average age is rising. And as your average age rises, your demographic dividend falls. And if you have to sustain that, it's very important that women workforce participation rate rises. I think these are very interesting, critical areas that this economic survey is indicating towards. And I'm hoping that tomorrow the budget initiates or creates that kind of web from where we can actually launch the true second generation reforms.
Certainly. So we hope on all of these we'll see some kind of build-up from the finance minister as well. But let me come back, Professor Singh, on the important 6 areas that we've been discussing. The fact is that, let me first brief our viewers on what these key areas are. We've discussed some of them, but on the other 3-4 which remain, we'll continue with the discussion. But the growth strategy which the economic survey has marked for Amrit Kal, it's predicted on 6 key areas. It says, firstly, there must be a deliberate focus on boosting private investment. Secondly, the growth and expansion of the MSMEs that Dr. Sharma has spoken about earlier on in the program. That the report mentions as a strategic priority going forward. Thirdly, the potential of agriculture as an engine of future growth must be recognized and the policy impediments removed. This is one important aspect that I will take forward and understand from the experts on what are the kind of impediments that need to be removed from the agriculture sector if you have to realize the full potential. Fourthly, there is a need to secure the financing of green transition. Now, for a country which is now the most populated, our energy demands are only going to increase further. So we need to have a roadmap of what our demand is going to be and how we are going to meet them. So we need to secure financing towards green transition. That becomes very important. Fifthly, the education employment gap, again, very important sector because remember, we know we are the youngest country as well, in addition to being the most populated. So it's important to skill them and employ them in crucial areas. And lastly, a focused building of state capacity and capability is required for sustaining and accelerating India's progress. So this perhaps is the biggest highlight of the economic survey. We've been talking about how the government's approach will be of continuity. There's been a lot of work that has happened in all of these sectors over the past decade, but a sustained focus is required on these areas if we are to realize the goal of making India into a Viksit Bharat. So a 25-year roadmap which the government did prepare, and now the government has to walk the talk. It's also going to be the 7th straight budget for Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Professor Singh, it's a record of sorts. We'll come back and understand the potential of agriculture. The Chief Economic Advisor writes, that it is one area which is in need of a pan-India dialogue. Agriculture, farmers for any country are important. So are for India, where we've been an agrarian economy. But he says that despite a lot of subsidies, despite not taxing their income, and the welfare schemes for the farmers, a case can be made that they can be served better with some reorientation of existing and new policies. Where are we expecting some kind of impediments? Where do we see the bottlenecks that are sort of hindering the growth of the agriculture sector, if I may understand from you?
I think he has hit the nail in the head. As you know, that the reforms were being undertaken in the agriculture sector, but unfortunately for some reasons they had to be withdrawn. That means there is already a thought going on in the government that these are the bottlenecks that need to be taken care of. One of it is commercialization. Is MSP the right thing? And if MSP is the right thing, at what all goods and services should MSP be provided? You must have noticed that today there was also another news item that if paddy in Punjab has to be, there has to be a change in the cropping pattern, government is giving huge amount of subsidy so that the diversification of crop can take place. So diversification of cropping is one important thing that needs to be looked at. That's probably one thing he has in his mind. The other thing I thought in his presentation and the report, he speaks about the small size of holdings, less than 2 hectares, and he says continuously that is coming down. And if that is coming down, then how does it support the family, and how do you double the income? So therefore, he has been talking about other agro-related products and agro-processing again, which brings in MSME in a big way. The third thing that he mentioned, that in India, agriculture is still rain dependent. And he showed a plot where he showed a 45-degree line, and he said, look at the number of states which show that there is rain deficit, and very few states are above the rain. So I think the irrigation part has to be also improved. Similarly, farmers' production organizations, those have to be, and farmer market organizations have to be improved. So in the survey, he has flagged various issues, and I totally agree with you that agriculture sector serves as a backbone. Now, one thing I must mention that also finds place, whatever said and done in India, agriculture still provides employment to a very large segment of the society. One can say there is disguised unemployment in agriculture sector, and therefore when he does the projection for job creation, he looks at how the demographic is going to change, how much of the labor force is being added organically, and how much is getting displaced from the rural sector, that's from the agro, and moving into the urban sector. I think that the estimate that he has made is a very good estimate, and he gave the reason why he has done it only till 2036. 8 million new jobs have to be created. Now that also brings me to the other point which was being discussed. When we speak about job creation, where is it going to be created? The public sector can do so much, and that's what it has been doing all the time. The private sector will have to now start thinking in terms of job creation. But then the economic survey also brings in, and I thought a very good point, of AI. Now AI impacts job creation. Yes. At EGROW Foundation, we had Michael Spence, the Nobel laureate, who is a pioneer in economics and AI. And when we asked him this question, that if AI is going to displace jobs, what should we do? We are so rich in demographics, it's going to be harmful to us. And then obviously the answer was, we have to do it in a very careful way, in a calibrated way, and in a way that is suitable for our country. That segment, that thought process, I saw in the economic survey. And I thought he's reflecting that once AI is coming in, it's not that we just jump on the bandwagon of AI. We'll have to calibrate it and think where all can we apply it in our country so that country's job creation, job absorption is not badly impacted. So yes, I agree with you. Agriculture is the backbone, but then along with agriculture, one has to think, because we are talking of a 25-year horizon, and in the economic survey he does projections of labor for 36, 37. We have to take a longer vision than just 5 years.
Dr. Sharma, in both the aspects, in terms of job creation, in terms of creating job opportunities, it's about modernizing. So Professor Singh mentioned commercialization in agriculture. how do we ensure that, and how would you expect the government to take this forward? The aspect of modernizing agriculture farming, the question related to agriculture is that. The second about job creation, when we say the role of AI, the problem here is, despite the fact that we are the youngest population, everyone is vying to get into a government job. How do we make the other sectors also more lucrative? I mean, you would have seen visuals every day in news. We are reading how the vacancy is for a particular requirement, but there are overqualified candidates and there is a stampede-like situation. And it's happening in city after city. We need to ensure that the right skill reaches the right place, but also we need to perhaps incentivize the other sectors also and make it more glamorous.
Right. Firstly, I appreciate the connotations by Professor Charan Singh regarding the agriculture sector, that modernization or these things are very, very necessary for the growth of agriculture. And I would like to add some crucial points, because I am born and brought up in rural Punjab, so I know, because I am not an agriculturist, but I am economist, but I know the problems or the bottlenecks in agriculture sector. Firstly, the problem of awareness. Many policies are for the benefit of the farmers, but the awareness part is very, very less at the ground level, because the policies are made, but those policies have to be percolated at the ground level, at the level of the farmers. Like they must be aware about what is happening in the policy environment, and there must be more and more awareness programs for them. Like some pilot projects, if some policy is provided by the government, there must be some pilot projects in some state there, so that the benefits are shown to the farmers, that this policy is bringing so much welfare and so much opportunities for the farmers. And second is the investments, public investments, like the gross capital formation. Earlier, of the total gross capital formation, around 20-25% was in the agriculture sector. But now this gross capital formation is decelerating of the total gross capital formation. This is now at around 10% or 12%. So the public investments are in the agriculture sector are decelerating. Means the agriculture infrastructure is not that much intact with our growth of the food production. Wastages are there. Like there are so many studies that we waste over 25% or 30% or 35% of our total food production in the wastages. So that is making a great loss to the farmers also, because they are not able to get the adequate money of their total produce. And third thing is the rural infrastructure, like the connecting the roads with the mandis and connecting the roads with the warehouses. So this must be at the top of the agenda to boost the agriculture sector and to make it more and more profitable and prominent for the farmers. And the smart villages, like the facilities in the villages are still, I think 30-40 years ago, the condition remains same. So we have to provide the adequate facilities in the public utilities, like the availability of internet, availability of the Smart villages will be the concept to move forward and to provide them the basic utilities. So that will attract more and more investors to invest in those areas, because if the infrastructure is not that much strong, they will not be able to invest much in the rural segments. And last but not least, I believe the agriculture sector must be at the top of the agenda of the policy framework, and there must be more and more policy testing with the pilot projects in the many states, and best practices of the best states should be adopted by the others also. Like Punjab agriculture grows in a great momentum. So those best practices can be adopted by the other states also in the other parts of India. So my connotation is that we have a lot of potential in our agriculture sector, as mentioned by Professor Charan Singh, that lot of population is still dependent on the agriculture sector at around 45% or somewhere between 45 to 50%.
And post-COVID with reverse migration, yes, we've seen increased participation.
And they are the actual potential demand creators in the country. Right. Because in the layman language, if the 45% population is dependent on the agriculture, so 45% demand is coming from those income levels which are not growing in the higher trajectory.
Okay.
So if If the agriculture incomes are increasing, then the demand momentum will become robust, and that will be the impact of the aggregate demand in the country, and our growth, the potential growth rate will be more than 10% in the coming times.
Okay, so, Professor Mohan, would you also agree that currently there are growth hurdles and agricultural reforms is the need of the hour? Would you expect the government to once again and try and introduce these reforms? Because if agricultural sector potential has to be realized, if agriculture has to become the growth engine and write India's growth story, it needs these structural reforms, otherwise, the growth hurdles will continue to remain.
See, no doubt that these certainly are the appropriate directions. But my understanding is that when you are looking at agriculture, direction and the required reforms are very simple to be done. Only thing which is needed for agriculture, one, it has to be connected with the market. For last almost 75 years now, what we have been doing is we have been providing supply side interventions to agriculture. Kind of pressures is what we are providing to them. I think time has come. All that our farmers need is no subsidy, no support. Connect them to the market, both the national level markets and the global markets. I will recall that in 1995, when the WTO agreement happened, there was one of the provisions related to agricultural subsidy, which required that subsidy levels will go down from around 30 to 10 or less, which meant that European countries were providing around 30% subsidy, which meant that if it will actually go down to 10, European farmer will not be able to sell a single grain in their market. It will become so expensive. Two countries which were slated to capture the entire European market were United States and India. United States was always prepared. Our challenge is, for example, the largest producer of agricultural commodities in India is Uttar Pradesh. Almost 85% of them are non-economic holdings. So most of our farmers either have no surplus or very small surpluses. These surpluses are often so small that 20 kgs, 50 kgs, 100 kgs of surplus, farmer find it difficult to take it to the local market. Imagining that to take it to European market is beyond imagination actually. All that individually these are very small, but collectively these are enough. Small farmers surpluses are enough to feed entire Europe. All that was required to create that kind of conduit. Meaning, if we can actually connect our farmers with the European market, the global market, the value addition that will happen will mean that what Green Revolution could not do for our farmers, this connect with the global market can do. That is one thing which needs to be understood.
Right.
Other thing is,
so the bottom line is shifting agriculture towards more high income crops and secondly connecting them to the global market to yield better results. Okay, so time is running out. I'll have to cover the other aspects also which have been mentioned, and in line with that, the fourth aspect that the CA mentions is the need to secure financing of green transition. Professor Singh, I'll take up your views on that, because he at the same time talks about the challenge that our energy needs are growing to jump. They're expected to grow 2 to 2.5 times by 2047 because they have to meet the growing economy's needs and aspirations. Two challenges particularly. Our resources are very, very limited. When we talk about shifting to renewables, the burden increases on land and water. And the critical minerals, again, that comes in as a factor, but they are very limited, for which the dependency can't be on all of it. It's very geographically concentrated. So there are challenges, but at the same time we have an aspiration that we need to meet the energy demands. So we need to not just grow, but grow sustainably, is something that we've heard Prime Minister say on numerous occasions. So what would you expect the government to announce, some kind of measures or build up on the existing measures towards energy efficiency is something, and perhaps build up on the other policies which have been in effect, such as Mission Life.
Yes.
We need to increase awareness. The fact is, these are policies, but they need to percolate to the lowest level, because it's going to make a huge difference.
So you answered it. Actually, that is true. The Prime Minister has been talking, or the Prime Minister himself made a commitment of net zero. and we have been moving in electric vehicles. And the EA also mentioned that when we talk of solar and wind, we have to be aware that there are times when there is no sunlight and there is no wind.
Right.
And therefore, we have to provide something which is sustainable. And because the energy requirement is not only going to be large, it has to be sustainable. You just can't have systems without electricity. So it is a real challenge. Electric vehicles is one of them. Lifestyle for environment is another where we need to be very careful. I was also thinking, and of course not given in the economics way, thinking out of the box, having studied abroad, I was thinking if we could come out with large buildings which instead of having multiple ACs, you have a central air conditioning which conserves energy in a very big way. So I think, and there are housing policies where houses become electricity surplus and they then supply to the grid. So I think we will have to, in our country, have to start thinking in terms of out of the box policies for energy. These are not going to be easy. Of course, he mentions the banking system in the country is also geared up for it, and we have also issued green bonds. So in a way, we are trying to increase the awareness how that we go about so that electricity consumption is optimally utilized. Generation is again optimal, and we do not depend on those factors which are polluting, especially coal, hydel and air, and those we need to really look into it. But I think that's an area which we will have to think out of the box, and we'll have to create incentivize. The Reserve Bank of India has already spoken about it, and we have also been thinking about climate finance for changes. One of the things that has been discussed in the Western world is retrofitting, wherein we enhance the speed of converting into use of electricity rather than going through the complete rigmarole. We do a shortcut and the engines are replaced where the vehicle remains the same. Probably that will have to be explored.
Oh, what is the role that the private sector currently is playing when we are talking about green transition? This has been in the focus of this government. It's one priority area that we have to work together. And here again, I mean, it's a collaborative approach, because the private sector will have to invest in companies that are, enhancing capacity. And the other aspect will be on implementation also, on how we incentivize, on how we give up jobs, create jobs also. All of this is interrelated.
Yes, firstly, they are providing the awareness to the investors, and they are organizing the trade delegations and exchanging the views and spreading the awareness. That is the first step which is happening in the industry bodies and the corporate. And going forward, expectations are that investments will come, and we have to reduce the cost per unit, cost per kg, which is very, very high at this juncture to produce the green energies. So we have to bring it down to the level of USD 2 per kg. That is the mission to move forward and to make it happen in India. So these are the developments right now, but we have to go a long way to provide investments, because investments are critical for this thing to happen and to expand more and more in the all the segments, because this is now becoming a new concept for the many corporate in India. So they are looking at it, but the investments are very, very critical at the era of high interest rates. So going forward with some incentives or some low rate of interest will attract more and more investments in this segment in the coming times.
Okay, okay. Professor Mohan, we've spoken about the fifth aspect, the education employment gap, but the last one says focused building of state capacity and capability for sustaining and accelerating India's progress. Again, very important because, when the task is cut out, you have ambitious goals towards, making India a Viksit Bharat by 2047. We said 25 years, 2 years have already gone by discussing the roadmap. So practically we have only about 23 years left now. When we talk about capacity and capability building, what are the steps that you would expect from this government, and more so because the budget is tomorrow, which lays out a vision of the Modi 3.0 government? What steps would you expect in this particular area?
See, there are a number of things which will have to be done. One is that good number of programs which are implemented, say the national program and even the state level program, end of the day, at the cutting edge, the way they are taken forward, they are taken to the cutting edge, that is where the delivery happens. So that connect between creating the policy, unfolding the policy, and actually taking it to the delivery level, that is one important thing which has to be done. Other thing is, we have very large states. For example, Uttar Pradesh, the largest in terms of population, has 9 agroclimatic zones. Each agroclimatic zone is an independent economy in many ways. Now, we have to develop programs for each agroclimatic zone. Even for a state like Uttar Pradesh and many other states, having one common intervention for entire state doesn't work. There could be some area where there is shortage of water. There could be other area where there is water logging. So for agriculture, for industry, for everything, there has to be a significant difference. Other thing is, in the rural market, there's huge rural markets exist. And as of now, some Chinese penetration has happened, but still there is lots of scope for developing those. Lots of production is happening in these agroclimatic zones. Lots of demands exist in those agroclimatic zones. These have to be connected first. Whatever production capacities exist, first of all, I will want that, for example, we are talking about one district, one product. I think rather than, see, districts are administrative units. I will want to see that the states start aligning along with their agroclimatic zone, because that is your natural economic climate. And within that, whatever production capacities exist and whatever resources exist, accordingly, production capacities have to be developed. And demand has to be met locally. We have to find ways that local producer is able to supply to the local demand. So lots of demand which is not getting satisfied. I think those kind of cutting-edge interventions have to happen.
Right.
And that will only happen at the federal level.
Okay, so while we are talking about focused state capacity and state capability building, one area that Professor Singh, very quickly, I would like your comments on, and where the CA has asked the Indian state to free up its capacity and enhance its capability to focus on areas where it has to, by letting go of its grip in areas where it does not have to be. The licensing, inspection and compliance requirements that all levels of government continue to impose on businesses is an onerous burden. That's what the CA is saying. Even though he said relative to history, this burden has lightened, but still a lot more heavier. Which are the areas and how would you expect the government to bring the weight of this down?
You know, I'm really impressed with this last, because this is part of the last thing. When you say the state capability and state capacity, education, health is part of the state. Yes. And if you want to bring in labor force which is very, very efficient and healthy, the state has to play a very important role. Similarly, when you speak about agriculture and irrigation and speak about MSMEs and all these, the state has a very big role in each one of it. Also, he has mentioned, and the economic survey also mentions, that China is sort of falling out. There's a great opportunity which is happening for us and we need to take it up. Now, how can all this happen? One of it is the incentivization of these things so the private sector jumps in. And state is able to focus only on governance issues, and the private sector provides laps up the opportunity and provides employment and provides looks for profit and provides all the other ecosystem, whereas governance issues are taken care by the state. I think that is where the focus is. If the economy has to grow faster, if employment has to be generated, each state will have to think at where its strength is, and how does it focus on its strength, and how does it now bring the private sector to jump in and contribute. That's how I would interpret it.
Very interestingly, because the fact is that the CA asserts, and he wants everyone to take note of the fact, all the stakeholders in this growth story, that let it not be a missed opportunity. Because even though the numbers look good and we are doing good, years down the line, we don't want to look back and say what the numbers could have been minus the burden that he talks about, which we need to get rid of. So we hope that the government will act, and build up on some of the measures and suggestions that the CA has mentioned in this economic survey. Over to the expectations now from the finance minister's 7th straight budget, which will take place tomorrow. So through the day, we'll bring you continuous coverage and views and opinions from distinguished guests. So do watch Sunset TV tomorrow for this continuous coverage. But for now, I'll have to wind up the program. It's been a very interesting and informative discussion about what the economic survey has projected We've analyzed the crucial sectors that India needs to particularly focus on, and at the same time build on the capacity and capability to realize and achieve those goals. So that having been said, I'll have to once again thank all my guests for joining me on this special edition of Perspective, and thank you very much to you viewers also for your time.
To watch more programs of Sansad TV, subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to like and share them.